Hello and welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be taking a look at a state you often don't think of as a competitive state in the midterm cycle, and that of course is the state of New Mexico. Now when we're talking about this fall's midterms, a lot of pundits are going to be focusing on the Rust Belt states on the gubernatorial level, states like Arizona, Nevada, and of course states like Georgia and Florida. But you're not really going to hear a lot about New Mexico, but I think New Mexico has the potential to really surprise a lot of pundits, but although the result in New Mexico probably won't be surprising to me, throughout this video we'll be looking at why I think New Mexico has the potential to flip to the GOP, and why I think part of that reason is that it's probably going to be overlooked this cycle. We're going to be taking a look at New Mexico's historical voting patterns the past decade or so, as well as the candidates in the race to kind of gauge why I think this is the case. So first off, we're going to be taking a look at who's running in the gubernatorial race. And first off, we have the incumbent governor, Michelle Lujan Grisham, who back in 2018 actually won a landslide victory over her Republican opponent. So right away, it doesn't seem like off the bat you'd think New Mexico was a competitive state this midterm cycle. She won 57.2% of the vote to 42.8%. Now, one of the main reasons I think for this victory naturally would be the blue wave that we saw back in 2018. Many Republican incumbents throughout the country were knocked off. You had Scott Walker in the state of Wisconsin. You had Bruce Rauner in Illinois. Throughout the country, you saw Republican incumbents getting knocked off of various positions of power. Another reason is the incumbent governor at the time, Susana Martinez, was very unpopular. She had an approval rating in the low 30s, high 20s, depending on the poll you look at. She was an incredibly unpopular governor, and I think all of these factors together led to such a lopsided victory for Michelle Lujan Grisham. So we have her on the Democratic side. She's running unopposed as the incumbent Democrat. And on the Republican side, we have a couple of candidates running, but the former GOP Senate nominee for the 2020 election, Mark Ronchetti, is destroying in the only poll we have on the primary. So this is really the only gauge we have for the New Mexico Senate primary, and he's got 60% of the vote, which I think is mainly due to his name recognition. But I think also, we're fresh off the 2020 election still in some people's eyes. They recognize the name and they're willing to vote for him. And, he was also a meteorologist in New Mexico before this, so he kind of was a no name outside of the political sphere. So that certainly helps in these sorts of polls. Now, in the general election, we have very few polls to really go off of right now. We have one poll from Signal. This is the most recent one from July of 2021, which has the generic Republican beating Michelle Lujan Grisham by 2 points. Now, I don't really think these polls are helpful. Obviously, if the margin is very lopsided, like we saw in an Oregon poll, which again could be a sampling error, there's a lot of things that could be going on there. But when you have a poll that's this close with a generic Republican, I don't really buy it so much, just because that, some voters really make their decisions on who the candidate actually is. But the fact that an incumbent Democrat is losing in a blue state alone, is a bit surprising. It should be alarming for them. This is a Republican-leaning poll, a Republican-biased poll, so take that into consideration. Also, the only other polls we have are also by Signal, and the strongest Republican nominee seems to be Mark Ronchetti. He's only down by 1 against Michelle Lujan Grisham. Now, something we're going to look at a bit in this video is the 2018 governor's race, and how a lot of the polls in that race actually basically underestimated Democrats' chances. So it could be potentially the case that Michelle Lujan Grisham is being underestimated in her chances in 2022. But a lot of pollsters have put this race as likely or lean D. In my last gubernatorial prediction, I put New Mexico as lean D. I still stand by that now. Obviously, when more polls come out and more information comes out, I'll probably change that, as needed. But as of right now, she maintains a dead heat basically with her likely Republican rival. I don't really think Rebecca Dow or any of the other Republican candidates really have a realistic shot. I mean, there's only one poll in the primary, but Mark Ronchetti was the recent nominee. He's well known. None of these other people running, none of the other potential nominees really have wide name recognition. So I think that alone will probably put him over the finish line. Now, when we look back at 2020, New Mexico was a state that went to Joe Biden by nearly 11 points. So right off the bat, it's not really a state you think of as competitive. The Republicans kind of wrote off the state of New Mexico on the presidential level after 2008, when Barack Obama won it by 14, 15 points, something around there. So he won it by a huge margin, and the GOP kind of gave up on the state on the presidential level. And since then, it's proven to be a reliably Democratic state since 2008. The closest it really got was in 2016 when Hillary Clinton only won the state by 8 percentage points. But other than that, and again, New Mexico has always been in the safe or likely margin every presidential election. But presidential elections are a lot different than midterm elections. First off, 2020 was naturally a good year for the Democrats, at least on the presidential level. Down ballot, it wasn't as great. Obviously, the Republicans picked up a decent number of House seats. They net gained 12 House seats in the election, with Biden still winning the popular vote by about 5 points, 4 points rather. So right off the bat, despite Biden winning the popular vote by 5 percentage points, just over 5 percentage points. So 2020 as a year was pretty good for Democrats, especially because they were able to take back the Senate. But in New Mexico, Joe Biden performed about average, I guess you could say, for a Democrat. He underperformed Obama, or I think he performed slightly above Obama in 2012, but underperformed him back in 2008. But nonetheless, New Mexico is still a pretty solid state for the Democrats on the presidential level. Now, on the Senate level, the race was a lot closer. This margin was 10.8 for Joe Biden. On the Senate level, the representative, who then became the senator from New Mexico, Democrat Ben Ray Lujan, only won this race by 6.1 percentage points. You had Mark Ronchetti. I don't know why I keep calling him Mike. You have Mark Ronchetti overperforming Trump pretty significantly. He's getting 418,000 votes to Trump's 401,000. And he's getting 45.6% of the vote to Trump's 43.5%. So that's an overperformance of over 2 points. So Republicans shoring up, nearly 20,000 more votes in this Senate race than they did in the presidential race, mind you, with less people voting in the Senate race. So Mark Ronchetti is already proving that he's able to overperform other Republicans, even in a year that's not so great for them. He's able to get over 40% in Bernalillo County, which is home to Albuquerque, the largest city in New Mexico. He's able to overperform basically across the board, all across the state. Basically every county, Ronchetti is doing better than Trump. Chavez County, for instance, he's getting 70.2%. Trump's only able to get 69.8%. That's a minor difference, but across the state, it tends to add up. But his main overperformance is in blue city areas, places like Albuquerque, where he's getting over 40%. Trump was only able to get 36.6%. And I think that overperformance mainly is probably taking place in the suburbs. Mark Ronchetti was probably more palatable to New Mexicans in the suburbs. He's also well known, and I'm pretty sure he's from the Albuquerque area. So all of those things put together gave him a decent advantage over Trump as a Republican. But nonetheless, it still wasn't enough to really get him over the top. But a 6-point margin, bringing New Mexico down to a 6-point margin when the state almost went 11 on the presidential level, is pretty impressive. Now, I was one of the few people that actually said that New Mexico was going to be decently close in the Senate race back in 2020. And the main reason for that was, for whatever reason, the state tends to be closer with non-incumbents. In 2012, you had an open seat where Senator Heinrich ended up winning by like 5 or 6 points. Basically similar to this margin here, similar type of year. Where you have Democrats, winning about 51% of the popular vote, and he ends up winning by 6. But in a midterm environment where Republicans are poised to win the popular vote by 4, 5, maybe even 6 percentage points, that really shakes up a lot of things. Now, another factor into this is that this is not a Senate race. This is not a federal race. This is a gubernatorial race. More local issues are probably going to prevail in this election. This is not an election where New Mexicans are trying to send somebody to Washington. They're sending a representative to the state capitol in Santa Fe to actually fix, local and state issues, not to go to Washington. So I think already off the bat, Mark Ronchetti has a better chance at doing that. Another huge advantage for him is that Biden is not popular in the state of New Mexico. He's underwater by 7 points. Again, this is a state that Biden won by nearly 11%, and he's underwater by 7. For context, the state of Virginia went to Biden by 10 points, and Biden's only underwater by 4 points. Underwater by 7, underwater by 4. Across the map throughout blue states that Biden won back in 2020, places like Oregon, places like New Jersey. These are states that went to Biden by a safe margin, yet he's not doing incredibly well in these states. Trump may have had approval problems, but he never had approval problems in safe red states. It was very rare that you'd see. I don't think Trump was ever underwater in a safe red state. He might have been net positive by just a few points, maybe high single digits, mid single digits, but it was never to the degree, I believe, where he was underwater in a safe red state by, 7 points, for instance. So right off the bat, this gives Republicans a unique opportunity in the state. The president isn't popular, and also the incumbent governor is not popular. This is an article from the Santa Fe New Mexican that's very recent. It's from the end of April, 4 days ago. And Michelle Lujan Grisham is one of the least popular governors in the country. Her approval rating is only 48%. Now that sounds kind of high. You think that's quite average for, a lot of governors this day and age. But the average approval rating was above 50% for most of these governors, most of the governors up for re-election. She's at the lowest of any of these candidates. And there's a number of reasons why that. People talk about the budget, Grisham's strong stance on COVID, with mandates and tougher restrictions than most other states in the area, and even other safe blue states, honestly. She was kind of going to the left on those issues. And of course, you just have the midterm environment itself and the economy. Those are the main two factors, I think, driving this down. Now, seeing a state like New Mexico, a likely state like New Mexico, flip red isn't unheard of. Again, we can go back to the 2014 gubernatorial election where you have incumbent Republican Governor Susana Martinez basically winning by the same margin that Michelle Lujan Grisham won. 57.2 to 42.8, a safe margin across the state, a safe red margin in a state as blue as New Mexico. But, a fair comparison is to go back to 2010, where you have Susana Martinez winning with 53% of the vote, winning by a likely margin over her Democratic opponent. Now, obviously, a key difference in this state is, one, the country wasn't as partisan as it was back in 2010, although 2010 was still a very partisan time. Again, when you talk about legislation and stuff, you had no Republicans voting for Obamacare, for instance, but in terms of the voters were more likely to still split ticket and vote for some Democrats and some Republicans, whereas nowadays it's a much more rare thing, and midterms are really just about who can turn out their base the most. That was always the name of the game, but now it's really who can turn out, down the line Republicans and down the line the Democrats more, really determines who will win the race. Now, it's a little unfair of a comparison, though, because there was no incumbent in this race. The former governor, Bill Richardson, who won by a colossal margin the last time around, probably would have won again if he had ran in 2010, even despite the tough year for Democrats. He couldn't run again. He was term limited. So it provided a big opportunity for the Republicans to actually pick up the state. Now, back in 2021, again, we saw a likely state. Again, Virginia only voted 0.8% to the right of New Mexico. And we saw a Republican, Glenn Youngkin, win the state by just shy of 2 points. It was about a margin of 1.9. Again, if New York Times actually updated their total, I don't know if this is the exact total. It's about the same. Glenn Youngkin won basically by 2 points around the state. So if this is any indicator of the kind of turnout differential we might expect, you would expect a Republican in the state of New Mexico to do a little bit worse, but to probably get around 50% of the vote. Of course, I'm not factoring in prior gubernatorial contests in this. I'm just saying based on the presidential elections. But that's by far and away no way to accurately predict which way New Mexico is going to go. I think it's really based on turnout. Obviously, past electoral history, New Mexico was more comfortable electing Republican governors than the state of Virginia. Prior to this, Virginia hadn't elected a Republican governor since 2009. And then in 2013, when a lot of the Republicans, from 2014 that were elected in 2010 were being reelected, Terry McAuliffe, a Democrat, actually ended up winning. So Virginia has a much more, apprehensive approach when it comes to Republicans statewide, yet they still elected a Republican this time around. And while turnout is going to be higher in 2022, I think the fact that you saw a state like Virginia, which a lot of people, including myself at some points, thought was gone, thought was a state that wasn't competitive anymore, that would be, a Democratic stronghold for decades to come, has proven itself to be, competitive for Republicans in off-year elections like 2021 and, like 2022. I think New Mexico has like 2021 rather, I think New Mexico has a decent shot of actually flipping red with the strong nominee in Mark Ronchetti. Again, it really depends how he runs his campaign, various factors like that, but Democrats should be worried about this race because it is by no means a lock for them. And every governor's race really matters. Governors have wide executive powers. They could join in lawsuits against the Biden administration, if other statewide officials end up getting carried with them, obviously. So governors have a wide array of powers that is politically impactful. And, winning a state like New Mexico for Democrats is important. And obviously, if New Mexico is a state that goes red, you could say goodbye to Nevada. You could say goodbye to Wisconsin, maybe Michigan, things like that. So it's a bad sign overall if you have New Mexico being really close for the Democrats this time around. And I think, based on previous election results, based on the kind of turnout we're expected to see, and again, based on what we saw in Virginia as well, and New Jersey. We didn't even talk about New Jersey yet, but this is a safe blue state. And again, I know that turnout in 2022 is going to be higher than 2021, so I wouldn't expect this wide of a shift. But the fact you're seeing a state that voted for Biden by 57%, the Democrat only win by about 3.2 percentage points, is pretty surprising. And I think it goes to show you that a lot more states than we might expect now, like New Mexico, are going to be relatively competitive on the gubernatorial and even the Senate level in some cases, at least mildly competitive, maybe in a place like Washington. But again, that's based on one poll and some past election history. Anyway, guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. Please leave a thumbs up if you did. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the bell notification so you don't miss any more videos I put out. And as always, again, thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.